The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. I'm Wes, and that's my wife and co-host, Beth.
Hello, everyone.
For those of you that are new to our podcast, Beth and I, each week, delve into stories that piqued our curiosity. Everything from the supernatural to the unexplained, or just the plain weird.
And we wouldn't do it if it wasn't for all of you. I know we say this a lot, but we really mean it. We honestly appreciate each and every one of you who take time out of your week to listen to us yammer for 30 minutes. And
yeah, you sure do yammer on.
Wow. And we also want to give a shout out to those of you who bought some of our merch last week. It's really cool to think that you guys are into us enough that you would wear our logo or drink your coffee out of a mug with our show on it. It just blows my mind.
It is pretty awesome. And I'd like to do another shout out to those that have purchased our premium episodes. We plan on having another one up in a few weeks or so. So with all that said, let's stop talking about ourselves and let's start getting into what we're talking about tonight. So Beth, where did your mind wander tonight?
Well, imagine this. You and your teenager are the only ones home at your house. Your kid, like most teenagers, is holed up in their room, their phone permanently affixed to their hand. They're listening to music, flicking through TikTok, and texting their friends, probably all three at once. But their door is shut, and maybe you hear a little movement now and then from behind the closed door. There are dishes in the sink, but you decide to take a moment for yourself and sit down in your favorite chair to read or play on your phone. But the dirty dishes in the sink are nagging at you. You had reminded your child that they needed to be done, but for whatever reason, your kid has put off washing them. Stewing a little, you decide to just let them sit. Eventually, you realize that you could use a snack. So putting your phone down, you amble into the kitchen for something to snack on. Maybe you grab some chips or a granola bar, giving the sink a sidewards glance, and you head back to your living room. As you begin to relax, finally, out of the corner of your eye, you catch a glimpse of a shadow passing down the hall and into the kitchen. Good, you think. Perhaps the dishes will get done now. A few moments later, lost in your book or game, you realize that you don't hear the water running in the other room, or the telltale clink of dishes in the drying rack. Exasperated, you stand up, passing your child's closed bedroom door, and walk into the kitchen, and stop in your tracks. Stacked on the center island is every single last dirty dish, still needing to be washed. The hair stands up on your neck. Maybe you have the full-body chills because something or someone was just in your kitchen, silently stacking all your dirty dishes. Out of the corner of your eye, you catch a glimpse of that shadow. Roughly human in size and shape, it crosses the opposite wall and vanishes down the hall. The ghost that haunts your house has struck again.
Well, with all these entities that are always moving stuff or making noises, it's too bad that they couldn't just vacuum clean or do the dishes sometime. That I would find pleasantly horrifying. That would get my attention.
Maybe you call out to it that you're not in the mood for its antics today and it should knock it off. Maybe you've even named the ghost based on the history of your home and who you think the ghost might be. But what if it isn't a traditional ghost? What if it isn't the spirit of someone who lived in your house before you? What if it's a tulpa?
I love the whole theory about tulpas.
Me too. Tulpas have risen in popularity lately. Most of the ghost hunting shows have mentioned them at least once in the past few seasons. And the idea of ghosts actually being tulpas seems to be gaining some traction. So, what exactly is a tulpa, and how is it different from our understanding of traditional hauntings? Well, sit back and let me tell you. Tulpas, despite being rather popular lately in cutting-edge ghost research, are not a new thing. In fact, the idea of tulpas and the practice of conjuring them, either on purpose or by accident, has existed for centuries in Tibet. Kind of. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is the idea that we can create illusions in our minds. The idea that if we meditate and focus on an idea, like, say, a peaceful garden, we can create that reality in our mind. Or a more practical application might be, if we imagine ourselves content and happy, we come out of the meditation feeling content and happy. Basically, the whole idea is of intent and centering oneself.
Right, kind of mind over matter.
Right. I mean, we use this idea all the time. If we're going to have a good day, we have a good day because we brush off the minor frustrations of, someone cutting us off in traffic on our way to work is no big deal. But if we wake up in a bad mood, already convinced that we're going to have a bad day or a long day, then when that person cuts us off, it just cements the idea that we were right. It's going to be a bad day. But back to Tibet and some Western researchers who got involved. Their interpretations of the Buddhist tulpa idea sort of transformed it one step further. If we focus on a specific object or entity, we can make that object or entity come to life through our mental focus. The term thought form suddenly sprung into being. One researcher, a French explorer named Alexandre David Neal, who lived from 1868 to 1969, and an American named Walter Evans Wentz, who lived from 1878 to 1965, traveled to Tibet and studied the idea of tulpas. David Neal experimented a little, putting all of her focus into creating a tulpa in the form of a jolly monk. Soon, she could even see this monk, and so could other people who thought this mind creature was a real person. As the tulpa grew stronger, it began to do things that David Neal felt uncomfortable with. Remember, she had her own religious and theosophical beliefs, and she felt that it had become sinister and self-motivated. She eventually felt the need to dissolve this now not-so-jolly monk.
See, it's kind of like Slender Man, where one man came up with it, put it out there on the internet, and the next thing you know, people are seeing it all over the place.
That's exactly what it is. So, what is a tulpa exactly? Basically, it's a thought form. It's literally an entity that has come into being simply because we think it exists. But our understanding of tulpas and how they manifest doesn't come directly from Tibetan beliefs, but rather from non-Tibetan European anthropologists, like Alexandra David Neal. Even without knowing anything about Tibetan tulpas, philosopher René Descartes, who lived from 1596 into the 1650s, had ideas about the power of the mind. Descartes was the one who said, "I think, therefore I am." His philosophy is that our senses deceive us. He uses the example of dreams. When we are asleep and dream something, it seems very, very real. We see things, we feel emotions like fear, and to us, what is happening while we sleep is reality. It isn't until we wake up that we realize it wasn't reality. But what if even our waking reality isn't real? Descartes felt that the only thing he could trust was his own thoughts and ability to reason. He couldn't be certain of anything else, not even the existence of our own bodies. It was possible that our mind imagines our bodies as a way to carry our thoughts around. I remember a professor in college explaining it like this. Descartes would say that the chair he sits on exists because he needs a chair. Our mind places a chair in our room, and our mind gives us the impression that it will hold our weight. Our mind creates the sensation of the hard wooden seat beneath us and the wooden slats against our back. If we didn't need the chair, we wouldn't have a chair. Well, you might say, that's pretty dumb. I went to the store and I bought the chair, so of course it exists.
Right.
Descartes would say, your mind made you think you went to this place called a store, and your mind created all the different seating options, and you just think you bought the chair. I know, it's mind-blowing.
It really is.
But I think Descartes would have wholeheartedly believed in tulpas because essentially the whole world was a tulpa to him. Anyway, somehow, the idea of tulpas made it into Victorian England and popular culture. I came across this really excellent article about the Victorians and tulpas, and I thought the author used a fantastic example. They used Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. So I think it's safe to say that most people know Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, whether they've read the original story or seen one of the 36 movie versions. But consider Ebenezer Scrooge for just a minute. What does he say after he encounters the ghost of Marley for the first time? He says, quote, "You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of the grave about you." End quote. So, to me as a kid, I always interpreted this line as Scrooge just trying to convince himself that he was imagining things. It was just his way of calming himself down. But based on what the spiritual movement and its skeptics thought at the time, what Scrooge says he actually means. The author of this article proposes that even writers of that time, and Dickens was a staunch skeptic of the spiritualist movement, by the way, tried to get the point across that the supernatural is actually very natural, that we're actually creating these spirits and specters ourselves just with the power of our own minds and bodies. And in a way, this has some truth to it. I mean, for me, maybe it's not the food that I eat, but the things that we watch or the things that I read certainly affect my dreams. So if I'm reading about tulpas, for example, or anything, maybe I'm reading about a family vacationing in Hawaii, there will be something in my dreams that reflect that. But then that just makes me worry about the dreams I don't remember. Because what did my brain possibly manifest that I don't recollect? And if that can happen while we're sleeping, why couldn't it happen while we're awake?
Wow. It's a good thing I don't manifest some of the things I dream about, or I'd probably be in a lot of trouble.
So what does this all mean for the paranormal? Yeah, you would be in trouble. I can't let that go.
I thought you would just pass right over that.
So what does that mean for the paranormal and for haunted places? It might mean that haunted places are only haunted because several people think they're haunted. That over time, we've put enough thought and intention into a story or a history to fill a place with physical thought forms, which could also explain why some families may move into a home and find it haunted while previous families had no issues at all. Or why just one person in a family might insist their house is haunted, and despite initial skepticism, the rest of the family, one by one, experiences something that changes their minds.
There's definitely something to it.
I think there has to be. We've watched ghost hunting shows where the hosts thought they were dealing with a tulpa. They did this phenomenal experiment where they went into the building and had very specific conversations between the two of them about the ghosts. Things like what the ghost's parents' names were and how many siblings it had. And all of this was made up. The host purposely fabricated the info. And then During an EVP session, they asked the ghost for its parents' names, and on the recording device, the ghost answered with the names that the host had given it hours earlier.
Yes, I remember. It was a very popular, well, it still is a very popular show. And it blew my mind because it even blew their mind at the time because everything came into question. But then I'm thinking, well, you can't really stick to that because how are you going to go on to any more ghost hunting shows?
Right. If it's all tulpas, then there's no need for ghost hunting shows anymore.
Right.
And I don't think it is all tulpas.
No,
I
not
think
at
it's a
all.
combination. But that, you're right, that episode blew my mind.
Yeah, not to say that ghosts don't exist. I believe wholeheartedly they do. But tulpas couldn't explain some of it.
Right. And the experiment that they did on that show had been done before, decades ago, actually, in Toronto, Canada in 1972. So, working through the Toronto Society for Psychical Research, Dr. A.R.G. Owen gathered a group of 8 people, including Dr. Owen's wife, a woman who was the former chairperson of Mensa, an industrial designer, an accountant, a housewife, a bookkeeper, and a sociology student. None of these 8 people claimed to have any psychic gifts whatsoever. They decided to create a character and an elaborate history to go with it, to see if they could manifest an apparition based entirely from their minds. They named the character Philip Aylesford and decided that he was a Catholic aristocratic Englishman who lived in the mid-1600s. He had a wife named Dorothea, but it wasn't a happy marriage. She was very beautiful, but not very loving. The made-up narrative continued that one day while Philip was out riding, he came across a beautiful gypsy girl named Margot and camped on the edges of his property with her family. He fell in love with her almost immediately and hid her away in the gatehouse near his stables, where he could visit her whenever he wanted. Dorothea found out, of course, but instead of blaming Philip, she blamed Margot, accusing her of being a witch and stealing her husband. Philip was afraid of the consequences if he defended her during her trial, so he kept silent, and Margot was burned at the stake. Stricken with remorse and despair, the fictional Philip took his own life by hurling himself off the battlements. Now keep in mind, this entire thing was purely fiction. Philip was not a real historical figure, and none of the details of his fictional life were based on anything. But to help cement the idea of Philip in their minds, the group even had an artist sketch what Philip might have looked like. Then, the group began holding meditation meetings, where they would sit around a table in a fully lit room and just talk about Philip. They tried to fully visualize his life. This was no quick step in the experiment. It took a full year, because they didn't really feel as if it was producing any results. But then the group decided that they'd try a more traditional seance-like approach. They dimmed the lights and placed photographs of 17th century items around the room. This time, when they asked for Philip to join them and then started asking yes or no questions, something remarkable happened. Philip answered. He would rap once on the table for yes and twice for no. But he didn't just answer questions directly relating to the backstory that they'd created for him. He actually seemed to have a personality, and he shared his opinions about things, sometimes vehemently, through knocking. And then, well, he started moving the table, sometimes just half an inch into the air, but at other times he'd slide the table several feet over a carpeted floor. And he would do other things on command. For example, if the group asked him to dim the lights would immediately dim. If they asked him to turn them back on, he'd do that too.
Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing, and you can watch footage of it online, and I looked very, very closely. Their knees are nowhere near the top of that table. And the Philip experiment wasn't done entirely in a closed-door room either. The group actually filmed one of their seances in front of 50 people as part of a documentary, and that's the thing you can watch online. And it wasn't an isolated case either. They were able to recreate the same results with a group of entirely different people, imagining an entirely different character. This one, who they called Lilith, was communicating with them just 5 weeks later. Then there was Sebastian, a medieval monk, and Axel, a man from the future. Each time, each different group was able to get answers through knocks and raps on the table. Now, to be fair, they didn't reach their goal of having Philip or Lilith or Sebastian or Axel manifest as an apparition, but they were able to communicate.
Well, perhaps in time, maybe they could have.
Right. And I mean, how powerful is that? That's crazy that our own thoughts can manipulate energy into saying things that we want it to say. And it's not just ghosts. You had brought up Slenderman earlier.
Right.
There's some speculation out there that the black-eyed kids phenomenon are actually tulpas.
Yes, I've heard this.
So, for those of you who may not know, the black-eyed kids story started in Abilene, Texas in 1996. A journalist named Brian Bethel had parked his car near a movie theater late one night so he could write out a check. He was looking down, writing, when suddenly someone tapped on his driver's side window. 2 boys stood there, and as Bethel rolled down the window, he claimed he was overcome by a soul-racking fear. The older boy claimed that he and his brother wanted to go to a movie, but he had left his wallet at home. He asked Bethel if he would give them a ride to their house so he could get his wallet. They kept assuring him that it wasn't that far and they didn't have a gun. They were just kids. There was nothing to be afraid of. Bethel found them pretty creepy and also confusing, since the movie they wanted to see had already started, and the trip to their house and back would eat into even more of the movie. He broke eye contact with them, and that's when things really got creepy, because according to Bethel, both boys' eyes turned solid black. The black-eyed kids insisted that they couldn't get into the car until he invited them, and they continued to beg for a ride. Bethel, freaked out, tore out of the parking lot. And to this day, he stands by his story.
Yeah, the black-eyed kids are just creepy.
It's creepy AF. I don't like them. Soon after his story was published, hundreds of other people began to come forward with their own terrifying black-eyed kid stories. In some cases, the black-eyed kids came to their door, begging to be let in for various reasons. They were always a bit off. Either they had strange speech patterns or they moved in an eerie kind of way. They always had very pale skin, and they wore dark hoodies obscuring their eyes until they revealed them at opportune moments. They'd refuse to leave, continuing to knock or call out even after people told them to go away. In other cases, the black-eyed kids are hitchhiking or begging for money on street corners. In all cases, the encounters with black-eyed children envelop the people who see them in dread and fear. The sense of dread and foreboding lingers after the children finally leave or the person is able to get away. Now, some people have speculated that black-eyed kids are actually aliens posing as human children. But far more people propose that Bethel's original encounter story spread like wildfire, and word of mouth helped the story travel from coast to coast. Then, a movie was made about them, reaching even more people. And as the idea of black-eyed kids permeated thousands, if not millions, of people's thoughts, the Tulpas were born. And who do they visit? People who already know about them.
Now, I wonder with tulpas, we can think of them and manifest them, but what happens when people forget about them? I wonder if they go away.
Well, I'm getting to that. I have a theory about a very famous figure.
Oh, okay.
So, Like I said, I don't like the idea of the black-eyed kids. They just freak me out.
Yeah, they're creepy as all hell.
And the first time I ever saw what I thought was a reference to a black-eyed kid was in the American version of The Grudge, which came out in 2004. And I don't think the kid was technically supposed to be a black-eyed kid, but it freaked me out. Do you remember he's got like the really pale, grayish skin, and then he opens
many a times. Yeah, many times.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was convinced I was going to have nightmares with that kid in them, and I did for like months afterwards. So, I guess the question, or the next question would be, do tulpas always have to be evil? And of course not, especially if we return to the Tibetan idea of them or Descartes' idea about the rational mind. And then that always brings me to the same question. Wouldn't Santa Claus be a tulpa by now?
Exactly.
I would argue that I think he actually is. So, I think the number I saw online was that there are 8.5 million children in the U.S. at any given time under the age of 10. Now, I know I should lower that number because of religious beliefs, but I don't know how much lower it would be. So for the sake of argument, let's say there's 6 million kids under the age of 10. If 6 million children under the age of 10 believe in Santa Claus, you'd think that would be more than enough intention to create a tulpa out of him, right?
Right, but it wouldn't be just children, because parents are telling their kids, hey, Santa's going to be coming tonight, you better behave, blah, blah, blah. So they're reinforcing this thought about Santa.
Right. And there are plenty of children who swear they've seen him or even interacted with him. And they're not talking about mall Santas, or they say that they saw his sleigh in the sky. Or there are plenty of those children who grow up and still can't explain what they saw. Even as adults, they can't explain it. So when I was about 11, I swore that I heard Santa's sleigh land on our roof on Christmas Eve, and I heard his boots go across the roof, and I heard the bells on the sleigh. And my mom told me I was crazy. But I swear I did, and to this day I still can't explain what I heard.
Well, maybe it was your dad just throwing some stuff up there.
No, because at that point my mother told me I was old enough that I shouldn't believe in Santa anymore, and she made fun of me for it. So I don't think my dad would do that if my mother thought I was beyond Santa years.
That's evil. I mean, why couldn't she just, let the other kids at school tell you, hey, there's no Santa, grow up.
But I'm saying there is. What if Santa Claus does become a tulpa for children until he's dissolved? Just like that jolly monk was dissolved for Alexander David Neil in Tibet. What if, as we grow older and our parents give us another explanation for the way things go down on Christmas Eve, our subconscious mind lets go of the belief, and therefore Santa Claus stops being real?
Well, for you, but there's always going to be new people that believe in Santa.
Right.
So it doesn't really just go away.
It does maybe for that individual, but not for the millions of other people that are continuing.
Exactly.
Right. You might argue that we're nuts, that there's clear evidence that parents are buying the gifts and wrapping them and putting them under the tree. And some of you might say, well, we ourselves did it, and we did do it for decades. But Descartes would probably tell you that you have no proof of that. And I would probably add, be careful what you wish for.
So, if I started thinking about a harem,
oh boy,
and not for the reasons you think.
Oh, there's other reasons?
Well, yeah, to do dishes, vacuum, laundry, those things to help you out.
Help me out?
Help you out around the house.
Help me out.
Yes, some sister tulpas.
You're doing this for me.
Yeah, and you don't even have to be in Utah to enjoy this. No?
I'm thinking no.
That figures.
Hey, Hey, did you know? Stage train wreck watching was once the coolest thing to go watch in the U.S. One of the most famous staged train wrecks was on September 15, 1896, just outside of Waco, Texas. 40,000 spectators watched as two locomotives barreled towards each other at full speed. When they collided, both boilers exploded in a massive display of power, and the wreckage was hurled hundreds of yards in all directions, killing 2 spectators, blinding a third, and embedding shrapnel into dozens of others. They weren't so popular after that. Who'da thunk it? So, harem boy, what are you talking about tonight? Ooh, harem boy. No. I'm the good one on this show. I'm going to stop what I was going to say.
Right, or she'd have you believe that.
What are you talking about tonight?
Well, you and I have talked about places that we'd like to go visit.
We have.
Like Egypt.
Yes.
Malta.
Yes.
Morocco.
Yes.
Scotland.
Definitely Scotland.
And although you've traveled all around the world, I haven't.
And I've never been to Scotland. I mean, where else can you drive through gorgeous countryside, stop at a haunted pub for a pint of Guinness, and then explore ruins all on the same day?
Right. So I'd like you to imagine that you are not just visiting Scotland, but walking through the grounds of Stirling Castle. I know you, and sooner or later, you'd be looking for a bathroom.
This is unfortunately true.
And I also know that your senses of direction aren't the best. So, well, you get lost in Walmart.
'Cause you move. We had this argument today. I go where I say I'm going. You go where you say you're going. But then you wander. And then when I go to where you should be, you're not there. It's not my fault. It's your fault.
Well, no, not when you go there multiple times. It has nothing to do with me. It's like, where's the food section?
Oh, come on.
You don't remember from the last time we went.
I know where the food section is.
Clothes, the clothes section, yes. The bathroom, for sure. You know where the bathroom is.
You better hope I don't lose you permanently the next time we go. Anyway, take us on our lovely holiday to Scotland.
So maybe we get a little separated, and you're trying to find your way back to where we said we meet. But it's okay, because even though you don't see any other tourist, you do see a tour guide in full Scottish regalia, a kilt and all, about 20 feet from you. So you approach him just to ask how to get back to the place I'm patiently waiting for you. You say, "Excuse me,"
Because I'm always polite.
and ask your question. But the tour guide, he's a big guy, and he's decked out in complete Highlands finery. He just looks at you and turns away. And he doesn't just turn away, he starts walking away. Before you can decide whether or not to follow him.
Right, because maybe he's a man of few words, or maybe I interrupted his break.
Right, but before you can move to follow him, he just simply vanishes.
Oh.
You have just tried talking to the Highland ghost of Stirling Castle.
Oh.
And you'd be just one of many who have unknowingly approached this solid-looking figure over the years, convinced that he's a living, breathing person. Other visitors as well as employees have seen him too, but not just him. There are claims of at least 3 more frequently seen ghosts still wandering the grounds of Stirling Castle, including what might be the ghost of Mary, Queen of Scots herself, which it could be since she spent a lot of time there. Stirling Castle has a long, incredible history. I mean, to cover it all would just be ridiculous. But so much of it is just so cool. Everything that you can possibly think of as far as what we generally know about Scottish history has happened there, as well as some cool stuff I didn't know. So I'm going to try and tell you the abbreviated version, focusing more on the historical figures that I think most people have heard of, and the ghosts that are said to be there.
Cool.
So to begin with, Stirling Castle was built on top of Stirling Sill, a huge crag that's 350 million years old. The earliest suspected settlements that claimed the crag as their own date back to the 7th century. In fact, some researchers have even tried to connect Stirling Castle to the legends of King Arthur.
That's cool.
Regardless, it was the perfect place for a castle, since it's surrounded on 3 sides by very steep cliffs, and it basically sits at the center of a north-south and east-west crossroad. The first record of the castle being there is from as far back as the 1100s. In 1296, King Edward of England invaded Scotland, essentially starting the Wars of the Scottish Independence, which lasted 60 years. When the British armies got to Stirling, the castle had been abandoned for a while, so they claimed it. But a year later, William Wallace was able to defeat a huge garrison at Stirling Bridge, and the English retreated to the castle until they were starved out.
I loved that movie. I know people have, negative feelings about Mel Gibson these days, but that was a great movie.
Everybody makes mistakes, and it has nothing to do with this movie. And it was a very cool movie. I loved it back in the day. I still like it. The following summer, the Scots abandoned the castle again, and King Edward was able to take it over again, reestablishing a garrison. But they didn't last long. They were besieged and kicked out by Robert the Bruce in 1299. 4 years later, in 1303, Stirling Castle was the last castle in Scotland to still be held onto by the Scots, and King Edward decided to attack once again. He sent 17 siege engines to do the job. We're talking battering rams and catapults. But Edward hadn't used his favorite siege engine yet, a giant trebuchet called Warwolf. Warwolf was actually the largest trebuchet ever made. The parts filled 30 wagons and took 49 guys 3 months to build. Apparently, it could hurl rocks weighing as much as 298 pounds from 660 feet away with deadly accuracy.
Wow.
The Scots defending Stirling Castle knew it was coming, and they surrendered on July 20th. But King Edward said, "You do not deserve any grace, but must surrender to my will." So he made the truce party go back inside the castle, just so he could use Warwolf against them.
Wow. Did he have a little temper tantrum beforehand?
Well, I think that was his form of temper tantrum, yes. And he won.
How surprising.
But he died just 4 years later, and Robert the Bruce became king of the Scots. But Stirling Castle was still under control of the British. In 1313, Edward Bruce, Robert's brother, attempted to take over the castle. Sir Philip Mowbray was in charge there, and he made a deal. He'd surrender the castle to the Scots if no British reinforcements came to help him fight them off. Edward Bruce agreed to the deal and backed off. Except the British did send reinforcements, which led to the bloody battle at Bannockburn. King Edward tried to hide out in the castle, but Mowbray switched sides and handed over Stirling Castle to Edward Bruce, just like he said he would.
So is that where they think the Highland ghost comes from?
Well, it could be, and how I described him is exactly how visitors say they encounter him. He's so solid-looking that people think he's a living person, but when they approach him, he simply vanishes. Some people have claimed to even see him walk through a solid stone wall near the dungeons, which used to be a doorway. An architect who was on the castle grounds in 1935 even caught an image of the Highland ghost on camera. The photo is really interesting. It shows the stone archway, or upper close, which connects the royal apartments to the Great Hall. Caught passing under the archway is an almost translucent figure of what appears to be a man in a kilt. If it's fake, it was really, really well done. Allegedly, the negative shows the image of the ghost, too, implying that the developed picture wasn't tampered with.
You'll have to show that to me. I don't think I've seen it.
There's one possible person that some people think could be the Highland Ghost. Gunner Charles Haynes, who died while trying to contain a fire that ravaged the castle in 1855. So he wasn't from Robert the Bruce's time, if that's actually who he is.
Right, so they don't really know.
No, they don't. The remainder of the 1300s brought a lot of renovations to the castle. Some of these additions are the oldest surviving parts of the castle that people can still see today. But besides renovations, the castle also saw a lot of murder, especially throughout the 1400s. There were a lot of kings named James who died there, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful at all, but it really was hard for me to keep them straight.
Like James 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 6. And...
Exactly.
Okay.
I'll just put it this way. There was a lot of wheeling and dealing going on, and a lot of backstabbing, sometimes literally. But I found this pretty cool. During the reign of James IV, from 1488 to 1513, Stirling Castle was the picture of a Renaissance court. He renovated the royal chapel as well as the Great Hall. He got the Pope's blessing to establish a college of priests there, and he even played tennis with a Spanish ambassador.
That's cool. I wouldn't think they'd have tennis back in the late 1400s, 1500s, but...
I didn't think so either.
I guess they did.
You learn something new every day. Some historians think that he decked out the castle with so many cool things was because he was trying to impress his wife, Margaret Tudor. Life at Stirling was so lavish that a poet named William Dunbar wrote 2 poems about it, claiming that people even tried to fly from the castle walls in a human-powered flying machine.
Oh, cool.
The poems are considered satire and not historical fact, but they do hint at all the things that might have been experimented on during the Renaissance. For example, there was an alchemist at Stirling named Caldwell who built a furnace in order to control the 5th element, otherwise known as the ether. The ether was a mythological or mystical force that philosophers like Plato had written about for hundreds of years.
I always find it so cool that all these royals back then, through the 1300s, through the 1600s, they all had alchemists and seers and magicians. I just think it's so cool.
Right, I knew you'd like that.
It's so cool.
Then in 1543, Mary, Queen of Scots, was crowned at Stirling Castle. She had lived there for a while as a child, and she came back to Stirling often. She spent quite a bit of time there in 1565, nursing an ill Henry Stuart, who she later married. When their son James V was baptized, they celebrated with the first ever fireworks display in Scotland. They also held a mock castle siege.
Wow. That's a lot for a baby's baptism.
That it is.
But anyway, you had mentioned that people claim to see Mary's ghost, Mary, Queen of Scots?
They do. There's a green lady and a pink lady seen in the castle quite a bit. The green lady is said to be translucent, but unlike the Highland ghost, who is harmless, it's said that if you see the green lady, you better watch out. Each time she is seen, small fires mysteriously break out in the castle. There are a few well-known sightings of her. One of the first times was when a young soldier accidentally bumped into her in a stairwell. But he was immediately transfixed by her beauty. It didn't last long, though, because she just walked right through him. On another occasion, a chef was preparing food for the soldiers when he felt as though someone was standing right behind him. When he turned around and caught sight of the shimmering woman in green, he fainted. On both occasions, a small fire seemed to erupt in some other part of the castle with no explanation. Although no one is sure who she really is, there are 2 possible contenders. One is that she was the daughter of the garrison commander, and she threw herself to her death from a tower after her father had her young lover killed.
That's a pretty generic explanation for a ghost.
That it is.
Yeah.
But the second possible backstory links directly to the fire. In 1562, when Mary, Queen of Scots, returned to Stirling Castle, she had several serving maids. One of them was said to have special powers. She had premonitions that often came true. This young lady had an awful premonition that the Queen was in terrible danger. Queen Mary believed in the girl's gift of sight and allowed her to watch over her at night while she slept. One night, the girl dozed off, and when she snapped awake just a few moments later, the Queen's bed curtains were on fire. What the girl hadn't realized was that as she dozed, she accidentally set the bed on fire with her own candle.
Oh my gosh. She was the danger that her premonition was about.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
As the Queen's clothes caught on fire, the terrified girl tried to wake her, but she couldn't. She screamed for help, and rescuers rushed in. They were able to save the Queen, but unfortunately the young maid died from her burns. They say that ever since then, she has wandered the castle in her green dress, distraught over the near loss of her queen. Although she doesn't mean anyone any harm, small fires seem to spring up in her wake.
Wow, that's a cool ghost story.
That it is. The Pink Lady is a completely different spirit. People claim to see her apparition as a woman in a flowing pink dress, walking from the castle to the church of the Holy Rood.
Holy Rood? R-U-D-E?
Yes, R-U-D-E. Holy Rood is another name for Holy Cross, and the church was named after a relic said to be from the Holy Cross.
Oh, okay. I'm glad you explained it, because I would have giggled over Holy Rood. Holy Rood! Holy Rood!
You find the weirdest things funny. Just cracks me up.
You're being so rude. Holy Rood! Okay, that was probably disrespectful to all those people that go to that church. I apologize. Continue.
You ready to put your little listening ears on now?
Yes.
Okay. This route from the castle to the church was a pretty popular route for ladies to walk, since it passed the jousting area. But just like the Green Lady, no one really knows who the Pink Lady is. Although there are 3 possible women she might be. Some say she is Queen Mary herself. There is a portrait of Queen Mary wearing a reddish-pink dress that was painted by French artist François Collet around 1558. But to be fair, the dress she's in can't be described as flowing. It's one of those super tight, high-collared dresses with a million buttons. But since she lived at Stirling off and on over so many years, and the Green Lady is already tied to her in a way, I can see how people might make that assumption.
Or they really want it to be Queen Mary.
Right.
Because that would be a huge draw, I think, to bring people in to see the castle.
It could be. Others say the Pink Lady was widowed during the siege of 1304. Still others claiming she was widowed when her husband fell during a jousting tournament. Because the sighting of the Pink Lady is often followed by the strong scent of roses, people have wondered if she is the ghost of Mary Witherspoon. Mary Witherspoon died in 1823 and was a victim of the Resurrection Men, body snatchers who dug up corpses and sold them to medical schools. Just an interesting aside, at this time in Scotland, grave robbers could only be arrested for robbing graves of material items, like jewelry, because Scottish law said that corpses had no monetary value.
Huh. So digging up corpses to sell to medical schools was okay, but stealing their jewelry was against the law?
Apparently so.
Huh.
But anyway, Mary's remains were never found, and she walks from the Church of the Holy Rood to Stirling Castle, supposedly in search of her physical remains. When she's sighted, people smell roses and described her as having a pink glow. That's awfully similar to the Pink Lady entity that walks from Stirling Castle to the Holy Rood Church, dressed in a pink gown and smelling roses.
Well, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, maybe she has more energy to manifest when she's going in one particular direction. And so when she's going from the church to the castle, maybe she's glowy, and when she's going from the castle to the church, she's more solid, and they see her in a actual gown.
Well, that could be. All in all, Stirling Castle survived 16 attacks and 8 sieges in its 1,000-plus years. It was the home of garrisons for most of that time. So, besides a couple of female spirits in the Highland Ghost, there are also tales of phantom footsteps of marching soldiers, except they were heard in places that there wasn't anywhere to walk.
That's always the coolest, when you hear footsteps and it's impossible.
In the 1820s, sentries used to walk the battlements. One evening, a sentry was on his way to his post when he stumbled upon a fellow officer. This officer was definitely dead. His mouth was frozen open in terror. A few decades later, when the battlements were dismantled, soldiers would report hearing footsteps pacing on the floor above their heads, as though a lone sentry was walking his rounds. More reports were made in the 1940s and the 1950s. The only problem was the battlements that once existed over their heads had been replaced by a steeply angled roof. It was impossible for anyone to be walking up there.
That's so cool. That's like when you hear people saying that they hear boots on wooden floors over their heads, but the floor above them's carpeted.
Yeah.
Things like that. It's so cool.
Exactly. So Stirling Castle is a pretty kick-ass castle with an amazing history.
I'd say so.
And I guess it's a place that some people just haven't moved on from.
It sounds really, really cool.
It does sound pretty cool. I'd love to go there.
Well, it was on our list to begin with, right? Scotland, so...
That it is.
We'll just make it a bullet on the bucket list.
Well, it's one hell of a big bucket, because we have a lot of places to go.
I think we've said before that we need multiple buckets. We need, like, the nesting dolls of buckets.
Yeah. Well, Beth, I guess that about wraps it up for this episode.
Yeah, I guess so. And if any of you would like to delve deeper into tonight's topics, as always, our sources are in our show notes, so you can click on those and find out more information.
That's right. So join us next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
Thank you all for your continued support.
See you all next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.